did so without authorization from Governor Newsom and against the wishes of local law enforcement who were on the ground, actively assessing and responding to the situation in Los Angeles in real time, a situation that didn't warrant the National Guard. In fact, by this time, the first few hundred troops arrived on Sunday. By the time the first few hundred troops arrived on Sunday, the protests had mostly dissipated and streets were mostly quiet and calm. Since Trump announced his plan to deploy troops, the situation on the ground has escalated quickly, with unrest growing overnight, causing highways to close and putting people in danger. This wasn't the case on Saturday or Sunday morning. This was not inevitable. We'll never know what might have been had the president left our state and local authorities to continue the important work they were already doing and were more than capable of doing. What we do know is that what we saw yesterday happened after the president's unnecessary, counterproductive, and, most importantly, unlawful order. An order that abused the federal government's authority and violated the 10th Amendment and federal law. An order that skipped over multiple rational, common sense, strategic steps that should have been deployed to quell unrest and prevent escalation. As a result, I, in partnership with Governor Gavin Newsom, are suing President Trump and asking the court to set aside the president's unlawful action federalizing the California National Guard. With this order, Trump and Hegseth ignored law enforcement's expertise and guidance and trampled over our state's, California's, sovereignty. They unlawfully invoked a law that's intended to prevent an invasion by a foreign nation or a rebellion, or local and state law enforcement make it so that the laws of the United States cannot be executed. Those are the only three triggers that would provide for the invocation of the National Guard, and none of them were present here. A law that's only been used on its own once before in modern history, when 55 years ago, when President Nixon ordered the National Guard to deliver mail during the Postal Service strike. The movement of the mail through the U.S. Postal Service was down. It was not happening. The laws could not be executed without the federal government calling in the National Guard. That's an example of the only other time ever that this law was used to invoke the calling in of the National Guard by the federal government. This is a law that requires the governor's consent to activate the National Guard. This is the first time since 1965 that a president has activated the National Guard without a request from the state's governor. And the governor of California knows how to call in the National Guard if and when it's needed. He did it with the LA fires. He did it in the summer of 2020 with some of the protests in California. So this is something that is within Governor Newsom's sovereignty, and he did not authorize the use of the National Guard here, did not call for it. Yesterday afternoon, Governor Newsom actually sent a letter to Mr. Hegseth requesting that the secretary rescind the unlawful deployment of troops and return them to the governor's command. The request was ignored. We don't take lightly to the president abusing his authority and unlawfully mobilizing California National Guard troops. Service members who work hard day and night to protect our state. They're tackling fentanyl at the border. They're tackling wildfires and preparing for the next one. They train and they prepare so they're ready if they're called to war. They work to keep our border secure, prevent fentanyl from infiltrating our neighborhoods, poisoning our people, and killing our communities. They stand ready to move in at a moment's notice to respond to a natural disaster. Activating these troops for protests that local law enforcement had confirmed at the time were under control is deeply unfair and disrespectful of their service and sacrifice. It pulls them away from critical work that needs and requires their immediate attention. If the situation had necessitated support from the National Guard at the time, Governor Newsom would have swiftly deployed them. Something he's already done, during his time in office, again, including as recently as this January, a few months ago, when he called service members to help respond to the wildfires in Southern California. National Guard weren't needed in LA yesterday, and sending them in only escalated the situation and contributed to the developments we saw overnight. I was in communication with local law enforcement this weekend, who confirmed that they had what they needed to control the protests in Paramount. If local law enforcement did decide they needed further support, the first rational step would be to call upon other nearby agencies, call in mutual aid through strong strategic protocols we have in place in the state already. There's a progression here. If you can handle it internally, the situation on the ground, which over the weekend, the LA Sheriff's Department and LA Police Department were fully capable of, then you do so. If you need additional support, you call for mutual aid. They didn't need any mutual aid over the weekend. California local law enforcement, over the weekend before the president issued the order calling in the National Guard. California local law enforcement are prepared. They're trained and they're resourced to handle situations exactly like this. This is what they do. They know how to do their jobs and know when to call in backup, including the National Guard, when, if it is necessary, if it is fit to do so. That was not the case on Sunday. Trump and Hegseth jumped from 0 to 60, bypassing law enforcement expertise and evaluation. They threw caution to the wind and sidelined strategy in an unnecessary and inflammatory escalation that only further spurred unrest. Let's be very clear, there was no risk of rebellion, no threat of foreign invasion, no inability for the federal government to enforce federal laws. It's no accident that the right to peaceful protest is in the First Amendment. It's because peaceful protest is a cornerstone of any healthy democracy. The ability to come together in community, call out injustice, speak truth to power, and demand accountability from those in power defines who we are as Americans, defines our history, defines what we stand for as a nation of the people, by the people, for the people. To silence the people is to smother our democracy. To any who are outraged with the conduct of President Trump and his administration, who feel moved to stand up and speak out, I urge you to do so peacefully, safely, and lawfully. To any opportunists who see peaceful protests as their moment to create chaos, know that local law enforcement are on the ground, ready to take action in order to protect public safety and protect the right to peaceful protest. Thank you. And before I turn it over to questions, I want to acknowledge the incredible, tireless work done by my team at DOJ, who were ready and willing to work through the weekend and through the night on this lawsuit. Brendan Hammy, Kendall Mickle, Thwaite, Megan Richards, Lorraine Lopez, Luke Friedman, Nicholas Espiritu, Marissa Malouf, Robin Goldfaden, James Stanley, Laura Fair, Nick Green, Christina Bull-Arndt, and Jacqueline Gonzalez. Thank you. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
If you would like to ask a question, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. You will then be moved to the queue. Please wait until I call on you to speak and state your publication. You may also use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask your question. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, you may do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. Again, please make sure you state your publication when asking your question. First question comes from Monica. Monica, you are now unmuted. Monica Madden.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Oh,
Hi.
Hi there. Hi there, Monica Madden with ABC 7 News in the Bay Area. President Donald Trump says that he's open to arresting Governor Gavin Newsom if the federal government sees the governor as violating or impeding with ICE efforts. I mean, this would be unprecedented, but is this something that the Trump administration legally could do in your eyes? And just any reaction to that?
I don't see it. It's just more talk, more bluff, more bluster, more threats. It's what they do. It's what they say. Mr. Homan has said similar things. So has Mr. Trump. Um, States have rights. States can do lawful things. The Trump administration has shown at least 23 times with respect to California the willingness to be a repeat offender and violate the Constitution, violate the law. It is the president and the Trump administration that is consistently and frequently, blatantly and brazenly violating the law, not Governor Newsom. So it's seems to be more a bluster and threat. And look, this is what the Trump administration does. They threaten law firms. They call judges, so-called judges, and call for impeachment and question their authority to reduce their credibility. They kick the press, the free press, out of White House briefings. With fear, they seek to gain compliance, and that's not happening in California. We're going to stand up for our rights. We're going to stand up for our freedoms. We're going to stand up for the rule of law. We're going to defend our democracy. We're going to defend the Constitution. Everything Governor Newsom has done and is doing is completely lawful in the best interest of California, supporting California, California's people, our future, our financial resources lawfully. And it is the president that needs to put a mirror up to himself and realize that the unlawful actor here is him and his administration, not Governor Newsom.
Thank you. And has this lawsuit been filed yet, or are you planning to file it today?
We're on the verge of filing it. It is not currently on file. It will be on file by early this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Jose. You are now unmuted.
Hi there. AG, your office and other state AGs are fighting the White House's attempt to rewrite the Constitution by eliminating birthright citizenship. And we've also seen nonprofit groups fighting the administration, ignoring judicial orders when it sends people to El Salvador. My question is, does this current fight have the makings of yet another constitutional crisis? And can you give us your read on the state of our democracy when we've got the president mobilizing troops already this way?
I definitely think we're in a crisis. I think whether it's a constitutional crisis is in the eye of the beholder, and people have different definitions about what constitutes a constitutional crisis. I have my own, which is if and when there's a clear, understandable, readily digestible, and easily followable U.S. Supreme Court order by the U.S. Supreme Court requiring the president to take certain actions. The president acknowledges understanding and receipt of that order and says, I'm not going to follow it. But then we're in a constitutional crisis. That's my view. We're not there yet. To me, that hasn't happened. There's a progression of steps along the way once a court issues an order to make sure that that order has the power and force and authority that it deserves and requires under our democracy. We've used one tool, which is a motion to enforce the order if we believe it's not being followed in the way that it should be in all its breadth and scope and nuances. We've brought those in our cases and we've won, and the federal government has followed and followed the order and complied with the order. There's civil contempt that can be brought. There's criminal contempt that can be brought before and on the way to any potential constitutional crisis. We have not had anyone held in contempt yet. So in my view, until a member of the federal government is held in prison for contempt of court for not following a clear court order, we're not yet at a constitutional crisis. So that's my definition. Other people have different definitions. I respect those definitions as well, and think that they're reasonable and thoughtful. I just have my own view, and that's what it is. Whether having National Guard troops on the ground in LA means we're at a constitutional crisis, or it's certainly an unnecessary escalation. It stokes the flames. It's inflammatory and provocative and unnecessary and unhelpful and counterproductive. So, and we're doing what we're supposed to do. We are not supposed to have, and it is not normal, nor is it acceptable to have a president who violates the law so blatantly and frequently. But should that be his course, a repeat offender of unlawfulness, then our response, California, Democratic attorneys general who want to fight for rights and freedoms, the rule of law and democracy, is to take him to court and haul him into court and hold him accountable and secure the court order that we deserve by presenting facts and the applicable law to secure that court order. So we're doing exactly what we should be doing, going to court. The president is not doing what he should be doing by violating the law yet again. This is our 24th lawsuit in 19 weeks. But if that's his course, then our response is to take him to court again. And we will take him to court every time he breaks the law, violates the Constitution, and hurts Californians. We're doing so again today.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Evan. Evan, you are now unmuted.
Hi, Attorney General. This is Evan McMorris Santoro with Notice. You're wearing kind of two hats in this situation, both as a person filing a lawsuit and also as a law enforcement officer in California. And my question is kind of about those two things. One, you mentioned that this hasn't been done very often, and I wonder if this is a kind of a novel case that you're filing. Have courts much, weighed in that much on when the president is able to use this power that is sort of delineated, but maybe not used that often? And the second one is, it does seem that some of this unrest is still going on. Are you saying now that sort of given this action that whatever's happening now is kind of on the president for fomenting things and exacerbating things by issuing this deployment?
Let me answer the second question first. Over the weekend, throughout the evening on Saturday and into the late hours of Saturday evening, LAPD had made it clear that everything was calm in the city of LA. I believe there were 20 peaceful protesters at the time I got the latest information on Saturday. And then LA County had an ongoing issue in Paramount. Issues flare up all the time. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department is the largest sheriff's department in the nation. By the way, the LA Police Department is the third largest in the nation. These are some of the biggest law enforcement agencies in the nation. They're fully resourced. They have highly trained law enforcement officers ready and trained and prepared for any situation. And so a example of civil unrest, protest that includes violence, is something that they're very prepared to handle. And the LA sheriff, through his own resources, without reaching out to any other agency, through mutual aid, was able to handle the issue in Paramount. Another issue flared up in Compton that night. CHP was already called to assist, and together CHP and LA sheriffs handled that issue, and things were quiet by the time the first National Guards people arrived in LA. They were quiet. Since then, they have not been quiet. So I'll let you conclude whether the National Guardsmen that were called unnecessarily and unlawfully by the Trump administration contributed to, caused, stoked the flames, inflamed, increased tensions, provoked. I think what I just laid out makes it clear. And with respect to the novelty, a potential novelty of this question, this section of the law that the Trump administration relies on, 10 USC 12406, has only been invoked once in our history, 55 years ago, during a shutdown because of a strike of the U.S. Postal Service. That was, the invocation presumably was under the section that says that the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, meaning there's laws of the United States creating a U.S. Postal Service, requiring the U.S. mail to be moved by the U.S. Postal Service. It was shut down, so the National Guard was brought in to move the mail. That's the only time this has ever been used. It wasn't used for other similar and even worse situations of civil unrest or protests that included violence. And so it is a rarely used and invoked section of the law, but the language is clear in the law. One, you need to have a rebellion. There's no rebellion. One, you need to have an invasion, or two, you need to have an invasion. There's no invasion. Three, you need to be unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Local law enforcement had all issues under control with their existing resources. Didn't even have to go to mutual aid. And the governor's agreement and consent needs to be part of any calling in of the National Guard. So that didn't happen, and thus, on its face, this action by the federal government to federalize the National Guard is unlawful. But you are right that this is not a section of the law that's been subject to multiple opinions and has a lot of case law on it. It's been rarely used for good reason, because the conditions set forth that triggers its use are rare and infrequent and do not exist here.
Thank you. Next question comes from Aton. You are now unmuted.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Attorney General and team. It's Aton Wallace from the state capitol here. Thanks for doing this with the Nexstar stations across the state. Two quick questions here, and you know how it is on TV. I only have so much time to really explain what the goal of the lawsuit is. So just to be crystal clear, the goal of the lawsuit is to rescind the president's order deploying the National Guard to Los Angeles. And the second question is, are you confident you can win?
On the first question, you're correct. The goal of the lawsuit is to secure a declaration from the court that the Trump order federalizing the National Guard and deploying them to Los Angeles was unlawful. We will also seek injunctive relief and a restraining order at the appropriate time. And yes, we think we will win. We only bring cases we believe we will win based on the law and the facts and our analysis. We wouldn't bring this one if we weren't confident of our success. We think that the conditions required to invoke the statute here, 10 U.S.C. 12406, were absolutely not present, and thus the Trump administration's reliance on that section of the law was inappropriate.
Next question comes from Cameron. You are now unmuted.
Hi there, Attorney General. Was curious about, you've condemned some of the more violent acts that we're seeing at night in regards to these protests. Has there been any indication that these are coming from a specific organized group? Are these randomized? And regardless, what is your message to these people who, are kind of indulging some of this chaos?
Unfortunately, this is a scenario that we see when there are peaceful protests, and everyday people speak up and speak out peacefully against an injustice, against a wrong, against something that they don't agree with, which is a core fundamental right in the United States of America. What we see sometimes is outside folks not interested in the underlying substantive issues that are leading to the protests that are being called out and where change is being sought. They sometimes embed themselves or use the protest as cover for chaotic, harmful, destructive, and criminal actions. And that is wrong. And my message to them is, do not participate in unlawful activity. Follow the law. If you don't follow the law, we will find you and we will come for you and we will hold you accountable, as those who have been arrested on the ground have already found out. And so it's unfortunate that this is happening, and I rely heavily on the local law enforcement who are on the ground, who are on the street, who are interacting with those who are engaged in unlawful conduct. And they've indicated that that the supermajority of people engaged in protests are peaceful and lawful, and that those who are engaged in unlawful conduct and harmful conduct and violent conduct appear to be members of outside groups not related to the underlying substantive issue that is being protested.
Next question coming from Michael. You are now unmuted.
Thanks all for taking our questions. I am Michael Zinstein of Cal Matters. And so I understand that your suit will say that USC 10 12046 or whatever the government code the Trump memo cited. I understand that you're saying that the conditions weren't met, but doesn't this basically rest on whether the protests that you just, or the protesters that you just identified as being unruly and needing to be arrested, is that not a kind of insurrection? Like basically, like when is local unrest sufficient to warrant insurrection of the kind that would bring in the National Guard federally?
Very rarely, and it's important to look at the definitions here, and the key terms are one, there needs to be an invasion, so that means armed forces from a foreign nation crossing the border and invading the country. I don't think anyone thinks there's that has occurred here. I know that there's a desire and a willingness from some folks on the right to call all immigration contrary to the laws of the United States as an invasion. It's a lay term. The courts have completely rejected that view, that unlawful immigration is somehow an invasion. So there's no invasion, and a rebellion is when there's an attempt to violently overthrow a nation's leadership. An example of something that might be closer to meeting the definition of a rebellion under 10 USC 1246 might be January 6th, where there was violence. There was an attempt to overthrow the leadership of the nation, from taking it away from an attempt to take the leadership away from the person who rightfully won an election and was elected by the people of the United States of America. That does not exist here. Folks protesting ICE raids and cruel and inhumane treatment of immigrants is not an attempt to violently overthrow the nation's leadership.
But I mean, there are other examples historically. I mean, for example, in 1957 with the Little Rock Nine, I mean, that wasn't an invasion, but that was domestic individuals blocking desegregation, right? But it was still domestic. So, I mean, you didn't bring that up in your explanation. So can you pull on that thread a little on how this isn't that?
Yeah, this isn't that because that did not rely on 10 USC 12406. And so 10 USC 12406 has only been relied on once ever. Again, just to reemphasize that with respect to the Postal Service and their strike. There's other ways to invoke the calling in of the National Guard, including the Insurrection Act. And that was used, I believe it was in 1965 in Alabama to keep the peace with respect to civil rights protesters. That's a different section that the president has not relied on here. I don't think the Insurrection Act would be appropriate here either, but we are open to the possibility that things are changing on the ground, that the president and his administration may rely on one statute or legal authority today. They might change it tomorrow. So we've looked at all this. We're prepared for all of it. But the reason that the example you raise is not doesn't fit here is because it wasn't that example was not a calling in of the National Guard pursuant to 10 USC 12406, which is the only authority cited here in the executive order that we are suing on.
So if Trump uses the Insurrection Act, you're fine with that?
Please don't misinterpret what I'm saying. It is not at issue. And if it becomes at issue, if he does try to invoke it, we're ready and we will address it as appropriate. I'm not aware of any conditions that suggest there's an insurrection. What is happening in LA, worse has happened across the country. We've had peaceful protests in California where some elements devolve it into violence, even though most of those involved are peaceful protests. Law enforcement, like the biggest sheriff's department in the nation and the third largest police department in the nation, are completely prepared and ready to address that. And they have mutual aid they can call on. There are many other cities in the county of LA who are ready, willing, and able to help. There are nearby sheriff's departments in nearby counties ready, willing, and able to assist. Before mutual aid is depleted and the National Guard is resorted to, or before the National Guard is resorted to, mutual aid needs to be depleted. And if there comes a time when the National Guard should be considered, the governor of California will decide whether they should be brought in, not the president.
Thank you for taking all those questions for me. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. Next question comes from Jacob. You are now unmuted.
Hi, thanks so much for taking my question. This is Jake Garden-Shorts with Scripps News. Sort of a two-parter here. Firstly, we saw the statement from the Democratic governors a couple days ago when all of this began. I'm curious if you've been in touch with any of your fellow AGs in other states and expect any of them to join onto this lawsuit, either as amici or perhaps as parties otherwise. And then picking up sort of on the unique legal questions that are at play in this, do you have any concerns that a ruling against you that sort of grants the government greater authority to nationalize the Guard could ultimately give this president far more ability to do something like this in California or elsewhere? So all that's to say, are you concerned at all that pursuing this legal route might ultimately grant the Trump administration greater powers to do this moving forward if the ruling isn't how you want it to be?
Let me take the second question first. We don't think this is a very close case at all. That clearly, based on the statute, if you just read it, you look at the ways, the one way that this statute has been invoked historically, the way that occurred, and the many instances very similar to what's happening in LA, where this statute has not been invoked to call in the National Guard. We think we have a really strong case based on the statute, based on the elements set forth therein. No doubt there's no rebellion, there's no invasion, there is no inability for the president with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. So we just think you apply the clear, unambiguous reading of the statute to the conditions, and we win. Also, the governor needs to be cooperative and engaged and part of the decision, and he never wanted the National Guard to come in. And so, I mean, that is clear as day, that statutory violation exists here. So, look, there's a risk in every lawsuit we bring. We've brought 24 now. When courts have issued orders, we've been successful in nearly every case. Are we going to be successful in every case? No, but that's not a reason to not fight for the rule of law, fight for our Constitution, fight to make sure that the president only does lawful things and not unlawful things. Of course we will. And we bring cases we think that we will win. We're thoughtful about it. We're prepared. We look at the facts and accept them as they are. We don't make up our own like others like to do. We apply the law objectively and dispassionately in our analysis, and we decide if we have a winning case. We have a winning case here. So we're confident in that. We don't think it's very close. Although I do acknowledge there's not a lot of case law in this space, because the elements, as I mentioned, where the 10 U.S.C. 12406 can be invoked are rare and infrequent. With respect to the Democratic governors, I'll say I was very pleased to see Democratic governors focusing on the issue at hand. Democratic governors, of course, have an interest in protecting their states, their rightful authority to look out for the health, safety, and welfare of their people and of their state. And they see this threat here to California's 10th Amendment rights and states' rights and gubernatorial authority as a potential threat to theirs. And their participation in their statement was welcome, appropriate, and accurate. I will also say that you saw statements from all throughout California, legislators and legislative leaders, constitutional officers, mayors and council members, supervisors, all saying the same thing about the impropriety and the unconstructive and damaging nature of Trump's actions here, calling in the National Guard inappropriately and unlawfully. With respect to my Democratic attorneys general colleagues, yes, I've been in touch with a number of them. Very grateful to them and appreciate very much their relationship and their support. Many reached out on their own affirmatively to me, knowing that our state was dealing with unlawful conduct from the Trump administration and asked if they could help, asked if they could support. Some have been very helpful as thought partners in our analysis of the facts and the law and putting together our lawsuit. And I do expect them to be heavily engaged going forward, what that looks like, whether it's an amicus brief or some other route to be supportive and engaged, I think to be determined. But there are many eyes across this country and within the state, including Democratic attorneys general, Democratic governors, and all of the many leaders within the state of California who are focused on this issue.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Chase. You are now unmuted.
Hi, Attorney General. This is Chase T. Felicia Antonio from Politico in California. On a related item, your office launched an investigative sweep of the location data industry in March. You cited concerns about, I believe, federal immigration enforcement in California at the time. I just wanted to add an update on that. Has the investigation found any evidence of a business selling location data to ICE or any federal immigration authorities, who those companies are and if those actions are legal? Just an update there, please.
Sure. Our North Star here at the California Department of Justice and my Attorney General office is the law and the law of California and all applicable laws and making sure that they are being complied with, followed, and that we are appropriately enforcing them and providing accountability. When we launch an investigation, we don't comment on pending or potential investigations. So with respect to the results here, when we are prepared to announce the results of our investigation, we will. I don't have anything to announce on that subject today.
And that investigation is still ongoing, though?
We don't comment on pending or potential investigations generally. If there's something that my team and I believe is appropriate for follow-up, we have flagged your question and it can follow up appropriately. But that's all I have at this time.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Ben. Ben, you are now unmuted.
Hello there. Thank you, AG, for taking my question. I appreciate it. I'm looking for the number of people who've been arrested in connection with the protests. I'm also looking to understand what charges they may face and also which agency has done the majority or at least plurality of the arrests. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that question is probably best directed to the LA Sheriff's Department and the Los Angeles Police Department. I think it's probably also dynamic and evolving. The law enforcement officers on the ground will arrest for different reasons under different sections of the penal code. And there may be charges, there may not be. The charges may change, they may be increased, they may be decreased based on the facts and the appropriate exercise of discretion of the district attorney. So we can follow up with you to get you something that's more helpful. But I think the law enforcement agencies on the ground that are conducting the arrests are best located to answer that question.
I appreciate it. And if I can just follow quickly, what have the last 48 hours been like for you? What has it been like going through all this? I know it can't be easy to sue the federal government. So what have the last 48 hours been like for you and your staff and the people of California?
Well, I'll first say that for our staff, I couldn't be more proud of them. They've been working overtime. They've been working around the clock. They worked all weekend. They pulled all-nighters over the weekend. to deliver to the people of California what we owe to them. Top-notch service, high quality leadership, where we are making sure that folks are being treated lawfully, that our rights are not being violated, that the state of California's rights as a sovereign state are being honored under the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and that we take appropriate, thoughtful steps. This has been a process for me and my team where we have been thoughtful. We've been sober in our response and analysis. We've seen the pain on the ground. I can't tell you how much incoming I've received from my fellow leaders throughout the state of California, whether it be legislative or constitutional officers or city council people, mayors, supervisors. Folks are appropriately very focused on what's happening in Los Angeles and are very eager to ensure that California is treated fairly and appropriately, and that the Trump administration follows the law. So it's been intense. We've been engaged. We've also been thoughtful, clear-eyed, and objective in our review of what has happened, what the president has done, the application of his purported authority to this set of facts on the ground. And we do what we always do. We respond with law and facts, and we take steps to protect our state, uphold the rule of law, and make sure that anyone and everyone, including, yes, the President of the United States, is following the law. So, we've sued him, as I mentioned, 23 times before today. Today's the 24th. On each of these cases, and every one of these cases, we have been confident in our on the likely outcome of the case and the substance and the merits of our lawsuits, and we're confident again today.
Thank you, AG.
Thank you.
Next question comes from John. You are now unmuted.
Hi, Mr. Attorney General. John Carroll from KPBS in San Diego. Thank you so much for taking our questions. Of course, it's always hard to tell when the Trump administration is blustering about this or that. But if this threat that came through this morning when he was walking into the White House, that he would like to see Tom Homan arrest the governor, what could, should, or would the Department of Justice here in California do in that case? Thank you.
Look, I'm sure there's a lot of things that Mr. Trump would like to see. He'd like to see a third term. He'd like to see all his political enemies be punished. He'd like to see law firms that represented people that he didn't like and didn't agree with receive retribution. He'd like to see the press saying only great things about him and not saying objective, truthful things about him. There's a lot of things I'm sure he'd like. That doesn't make it legal. It doesn't make it constitutional. It doesn't make it lawful. So it's unfortunate that we have a president of the United States that is so reckless and irresponsible, so contemptuous of the law, such a repeat offender when it comes to constitutional violations and other violations. The people of this nation and the people of California deserve better. They deserve more. But such as it is, they will get from my office and our governor robust and committed and resolute action that lifts up the rights of our people, protects our state, defends our future. And the governor should have nothing to worry about because he has only done lawful things. And you saw what he said in response to that threat. He called their bluff. If they decide to arrest a governor, it will be a very significant ratcheting up of their unlawful actions. And of course, we'll do everything in our power to make sure no rights are violated and that the rights and freedoms of all people, including our governor, are protected.
Thank you. Next question comes from Tim. You are now unmuted.
Hi. Given that you see this as plainly illegal, I wonder if you can walk me through the decision to respond with a letter and a lawsuit as opposed to like an order to the National Guard to disregard the president's illegal order?
We think the appropriate way to handle an unlawful action from the Trump administration is the course that we've taken every time we've seen an unlawful action from the Trump administration, which is to go to court, present the law, present the facts, get a court order that the Trump administration must comply with, that is consistent with our view of their unlawful action. So that's the appropriate way. It's not appropriate to unilaterally make decisions. And
well, I guess there's a dueling command structure of the Guard. And so I guess I don't know what the law is on that, but I wondered if there was consideration of Governor Newsom saying, you know what, National Guard leadership, the president has issued an illegal order. You're under my command until he meets these thresholds. You know, you're not to deploy.
Yeah, you know, I think that would be confusing to the National Guard. They'd be getting two orders from two of their bosses, so to speak, who, this is a joint National Guard. It's the California National Guard. There's a state and a federal component to it. The governor is in charge. You want to talk about the leadership structure nearly all the time, unless there is a appropriate invocation of a legal authority by the president to exert authority with respect to deploying the National Guard. He has not done that here. But we think the appropriate way is to get a clear order from the court saying that Trump's actions were unlawful. We can do that in very quickly and rapidly with respect to seeking a temporary restraining order, which is done on shortened time and gets a quick hearing and a quick order. The Trump administration likes to ignore laws and just barrel forward. We like to follow the laws and go through the process, including going to court to secure a court order. So we think that's the appropriate way to handle this issue, to create clarity, even with respect to the leadership structure. The court should be declaring that Governor Newsom has the command here, not President Trump. And I think that needs to come from a court, not just from the governor saying it at the same time that the Trump administration has tried to exert their authority. This is a dispute that needs to be resolved in the courts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question comes from Camilla. You are now unmuted.
Hi, this is Camila Bernal with NBC News. Two things. One, do you have an exact number of National Guard members in LA right now? And do you anticipate the full 2,000 by end of day, or at what point do you anticipate that? And how long do you think they'll anticipate them staying in LA? And then I also wanted to talk about the pretext of all of this. Do you or your office or the governor have any indication of what happened at the Fashion District or at the Home Depot, and sort of what was the basis for the Trump administration in bringing the Guard here, and how does that play into your arguments?
Yeah, don't want to do too much speculation about what the Trump administration might be thinking, or also with respect to the number of troops and when they're going to arrive. But my understanding is that the initial deployment, the order is for 2,000, but the initial deployment was around 300. I think based on the latest information I have, which of course I'll acknowledge is it's dynamic and things are changing quickly on the ground, is that it's about that number of troops that are deployed now. The order is for a 60-day deployment. So yeah, I do think that over time, the full 2,000 will be deployed. Of course, that's me trying to predict what a president who frequently changes his mind and flip-flops back and forth and is completely unpredictable with the toggle switch leadership style that he has. But I would think if they had an order for 2,000, they deployed what was readily available immediately, 300, and they'll deploy the rest as soon as possible. What day that will be, I don't know. But over the course of 60 days, will they deploy the 2,000? I'd say highly likely. That's what the order says. I take them at their word about what they put in the order. With respect to what happened on the ground in Paramount and later in Compton, we saw what was mostly a peaceful protest turn into a level of violence and unlawfulness that needed to be addressed. And the sheriff's department had it well in control with his existing resources and was able to make sure that, over the time that he deployed his resources there and calmed and quelled the situation, that it got back to the appropriate peaceful status quo that was required. So, but what the Trump administration is thinking is not something I want to speculate about. What we do take them at their word at is the statute that they've invoked, and that is what we are analyzing. The statute says that the president can deploy the National Guard if there is a rebellion. There's no rebellion. That the president can deploy the National Guard if there's invasion. There's no invasion. That the president of the United States can deploy the National Guard if they cannot execute the laws of the United States. That is not an issue either. So we just look at what they've ordered and the authority that they've relied on, and we have determined that there's no basis for the president's federalization of the National Guard and deploying it to LA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have time for one last question from Swasti. You are now unmuted.
Hi, thank you so much for taking questions. I'm Swasti with the Times of San Diego. And as you've mentioned, much of these protests, many of which are concentrated in Southern California, concern ICE's recent activity, which many are calling unlawful raids and detentions. Specifically, given your office's filing of the lawsuit regarding the Trump administration's withholding of disaster relief funds until states enacted certain immigration enforcement actions, I was wondering if your office was investigating or planning to take any legal action against the ICE's enforcement actions themselves.
So let me be very clear about the federal government's ability to enforce immigration law. The federal government has the authority and the ability to lawfully enforce immigration law. It might not be what some Californians believe is good policy or is an appropriate use of federal resources, but they can enforce immigration laws if they do it lawfully. And I say the word lawfully very deliberately. Doesn't mean they can do anything and everything anytime they want. They can't violate people's Fourth Amendment rights. They can't falsely arrest people or wrongfully search people or improperly detain people. They can't racially profile. They can't use excessive force. So there's a lot of ways that in the course of an immigration enforcement action, there could be unlawful conduct, and that is not allowed. That is not permissible. It violates the law, and there's ways to remedy that if it happens. So generally, those remedies are sought by individuals who are harmed. The person, for example, who is hurt by excessive force, or who's been falsely arrested, or who's been improperly detained. Those folks would have causes of action. They'd be able to sue to seek a remedy for the harm they receive for the unlawful conduct. We are very interested in making sure that people know their rights. We've been aggressive in informing folks of their existing rights under law and how to make sure that their rights are not violated and that they exercise their rights lawfully and appropriately. We've also been very interested in how immigration enforcement is occurring. Is it happening lawfully? Are there any violations? I think it's important that there be a light shined on what's happening, what the conduct is like, if people are being treated with due process and consistent with law, or are they not? So that's an ongoing area of interest for us. That there's many aspects to the immigration enforcement question that you've asked. We're also very focused on making sure that local law enforcement jurisdictions follow existing law, including our public safety jurisdiction law, SB 54, which says that we're going to use our resources on tackling crime and keeping people safe from crime, and not diverting resources to civil immigration enforcement when there's a whole department and agency in the federal government that does that. So we're very focused on lawful immigration enforcement activities and ensuring that anything that's done is being done lawfully, and that will continue to be our focus.
Got it. Have any investigations in, on the part of the office kind of revealed any sort of immigration enforcement happening unlawfully, or is that kind of a pending investigation?
Three things. One, the remedy generally for unlawful immigration enforcement action is in the hands of individuals, those who are treated unlawfully. Two, we've received quite a bit of reports and concerns around what's happening on the ground, where we continue to be interested through our portal and our hotline to receive updates about what's happening on the ground with the immigration enforcement. And then three, we don't comment on pending or potential investigations, including ones in this area.
Got it. Thank you.
That's all we have time for.
Thank you, everyone, for your attendance and your engagement. I appreciate you all, and see you next time. Thanks.